So this is your daily comprehensive World War III update, all the news in one place. Poland has scrambled 3 F-16s to intercept a missile nearing their border with Ukraine. I've been telling you guys this. I've been warning you for the past week. They're looking for any excuse to create an altercation that is going to give them the justification to move into Western Ukraine. I don't even know if these were Polish F-16s. The fog of war is so thick right now that for all we know, these could have been Ukrainians flying these planes and doing some sort of training mission. Because remember, we are on the brink of seeing these NATO fighter jets enter the fray. The missile fortunately changed trajectory at the last minute and did not enter Poland. But everything that is going on in that region right now, this is crazy that this even happened in the first place. It's crazy that the Russians sent a missile that close. Okay, so I don't know what is actually happening under the cover here, why they would get so close, knowing that Steadfast Defender, the largest NATO exercise in history, or one of, is currently taking place there. Must have been something pretty substantial. And perhaps all this talk about air alerts and Poland basically saying that all aircraft now have to have their transponders on at all times, and other information we're going to cover today, something is going on, okay? Now, we got a ton of information to share with you today. Just kick back, put this on your long commute to work, whatever you got to do, because this is going to be a morning upload. We got to talk about the Chinese economy. People are saying it's not doing good, but I'm going to tell you why it's actually doing a lot better than ours. All it means is that our crash is going to be epic. It's going to be cataclysmic, apocalyptic. We got to talk about the Iranian threat Geiger counter meter, a fancy infographic which was created by some institute, funded by some globalists somewhere, founded by Sir David Albright. He was a guy who was a former nuclear weapons inspector, I think, the one that's saying that Iran is a week away from a nuclear weapon. Anyway, we'll talk about it, okay? And then now the Israelis are saying that the Iranians actually gave money to Hamas and they got these computers out of the Gaza Strip. So, you know, the narrative is being stitched together. If you're wondering what this is, we talked about this last year, but now it's official. The Russians are introducing a curriculum, into the curriculum, nuclear war survival skills. Okay, so this is not just a one-day course. This is a semester, a yearly experience that their students are going to go through that's going to teach them everything they need to survive Mad Max. We also got to talk about Russia burning down, which it continues to, and that is all the more reason why the aforementioned global conflict is inevitable. Russian students are going to be receiving nuclear training, how to protect themselves in a potential nuclear war as a part of the national curriculum. This is going to be called Fundamentals of Security and Defense of the Motherland. Think about that. They're reintroducing something that was abolished after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1993. They're bringing it back. They're going to be teaching people the following: how to understand the damaging effects of weapons of mass destruction, okay? It's going to cover security and defense, basic military training, weapons usage, first aid, self-defense, countering extremist activities, and this is going to be very compatible with the extensive network of cavernous subterranean bunker systems that they have for their entire population. Now, we really have to ask ourselves, what are we learning in our schools? They can't even teach my kids math nowadays. In fact, the teachers are on strike and my kids are learning more nowadays. While they are training, we are transitioning. And bad joke. Okay, I wasn't going to do the joke. It just slipped out. But it is what it is. That's really the situation we are in. We are in no way, shape, or form prepared to endure what they are getting ready to endure. And that is not a slight against people who are swinging in that direction. I could care less what you do, but understand that if you are dependent on any sort of medical intervention, that when the grid stops and when the supply trucks stop rolling, and if you don't have your Jace medical case that full of medication and chronic medications that you need in order to maintain whatever sort of homeostasis that you need to in order to be normal and have a mental equilibrium, then you're going to be in big, big trouble. There's going to be some nasty withdrawal effects, and I would encourage you to just consider living a natural life, however it is you do it, okay? Now, anyways, this course is going to be starting on September 1st. So it's not starting right away. So I guess we still got a little bit of time, but they're getting ready to prime the population. Recall last year they did the first ever nationwide nuclear exercise, and it came just a day after the Americans did their national test of the emergency alert system. Latvia is following in suit, and they are reintroducing conscription to deter Russia from invading Europe. That'll show them. Population of 1.7 million people. Probably not going to cause Vladimir Putin to lose any sleep, but the compulsory draft is coming into force. Actually, it came into force in January. So just another NATO country that is preparing for the end of days. As should you or any prudent, astute prepper. F-16s to be used from Romania through Moldova. Now, Moldova, if you didn't know, is a neutral country, so they're not part of NATO. According to Moldovan Telegram channels, and I probably should have led with this because this is incredibly important, but Moldovan Telegram channels are reporting that President Maya Sandu may allow American F-16 fighter jets transferred to Ukraine to fly over from Romania over Moldova to strike Russian forces. I mean, you gotta be insane to allow this, considering that the Russians have a large contingent in Transnistria, as well as some of the largest ammo supply facilities there as well. I'm pretty sure the only reason why Ukraine hasn't went in there is because Russia has probably threatened them on the back channels to wipe Kiev off the map, which we all know they can do. It can do if they wanted to. If you think that they couldn't do some aggressive, indiscriminate of collateral damage, shock and awe bombing campaign and wipe Kiev off the map, they absolutely could. The fact that they haven't yet means that there's some sort of communication going on. And I'm actually suspicious that maybe this whole Tucker thing is some way of trying to smooth things over a little bit. But I'm not entirely sold on what is going on there. I guess we're going to see what the results are afterwards. Anyways, allegedly, negotiations are underway to station Ukraine's F-16 fighter jets in Romania, which is crazy unto itself because that means that the Russians are going to have to target Romania or Poland. Ukrainian fighter jets will take off from there, fly through Moldova's airspace, strike the Russian armed forces, and then the Russians are just going to let them, fly back over. What do you think is going to happen? They're setting the situation up for these fighter jets to be shot down over Moldova. That is the situation that they're setting up. Holy shit. Man, that is crazy. That is absolutely crazy. We're just days away. I mean, recall that they were supposed to be there. They already are probably there in some way, shape, or form. I'm quite certain that a lot of this gear must be coming through tunnels under Poland or something, because, how else could they be moving all this equipment without the Russians knowing? Poland has obliged all civilian aircraft to fly with their transponders on. So all civilian aircraft flying over areas of eastern Poland must have their transponders on, according to the press secretary. And the reason why, as I explained yesterday, if you caught yesterday's episode, if you can call it that, is because they are worried about Russian retaliation for the plane that was shot down utilizing NATO radar technology. So it was shot down with a Patriot missile defense system that the Russians are suspecting were partly operated, at least, by NATO operatives who are working inside Ukraine alongside Ukrainians, although they'll never admit to actually pushing the button. And perhaps they didn't. Regardless, the Russians claim to have evidence that they were utilizing a radar that was independent, that only NATO has access to. And for that reason, because they shot down this $500 million plane with a bunch of POWs and the Russian flight crew and who knows else on it, the Poles are actually worried that they are going to be a target, one of their major airfields, logistics hub for transporting weapons to Ukraine. They're concerned that that is going to be the target, which is why all this air alert craziness. But really, it's all cover. A lot of people think for the whole steadfast noon mission creep towards intervention in Western Ukraine. Now, analysts suggest that they are practicing for scenarios of war with Russia in the Baltic region around Kaliningrad and the Suwalki corridor. Many people think that if a World War III is going to start, be demarcated officially, I think it's probably going to come from a shoot down of a plane over Moldova or Poland that is trying to make its way into Ukraine to use its missiles to target Russian forces. But I think the second most likely place is going to be the Suwalki corridor, because the Poles are threatening to take it over. They don't refer to it as Kaliningrad. They actually refer to it as, what do they call it? Königsberg. And they believe that Kaliningrad is actually occupied territory and doesn't belong to Russia. Retired Polish General Waldemar, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that last name. What is with the Polish language? No offense to my Polish brothers and sisters, but there's just not enough vowels, okay? There's just way too many consonants for simple Canadian minds like mine to make sense of. Threatened Russia with the loss of Kaliningrad region in case of a conflict with NATO. So, he mentioned that Poland's fortification efforts along the Russian and Belarusian borders are being put there to impede Russian army advancement. So they're saying that these NATO maneuvers and all of the fortifications of the borders in and around the Suwalki region are to prevent, and what's going on in the Baltic Sea as well, is being put in place to prevent Russia from coming to the aid of Kaliningrad. Now recall, Vladimir Putin just went to Kaliningrad, and I believe that he went there recently to make sure that everybody was on board, and also to use his KGB nose to try to sniff out any potential dissidents and turncoats before the shit hits the fan, all right? Now, some people think, according to Danish intelligence, to name a few, believe that Putin doesn't actually care about Article 5. Putin has already stated, in fact, that he's not too concerned if NATO goes into Western Ukraine necessarily, but if there's still a war going on and you have a situation where Western Ukraine is the staging ground, the logistics hub. So let's say NATO moves into Western Ukraine. Putin is on record as saying, look, hey, you know, historically, Lviv, if you want to be a part of Poland, fine, go for it. We don't care, just don't mess with the eastern part where, you know, we got the most votes in whatever election took place, 10 years ago or whatever. They are more so concerned about it being used as a logistical hub. So if the war is still raging, that's when things become problematic. Because then you have NATO in the West locking down that part of the country, okay, protecting that part of the country essentially. That frees up the Ukrainian military, who will then likely have numerical superiority if you factor in all their conscripts. Now, you might say, well, their professional army has been all but destroyed, but they do have a lot of professional mercenaries in the mix. Who knows what the spread is in terms of how many mercenaries to actually Ukrainian soldier ratio there is at this point in time. I'm sure it's getting closer and closer in terms of proportion, but this is going to allow the Ukrainians to push further. And so the Russians are inevitably going to have to target Western Ukraine, where now there will be positioned NATO forces, although they won't go by that name. They'll go by some sort of coalition. Anyways, this Danish intelligence officer has warned that Putin doesn't give a shit about Article 5. And he thinks it's just empty words. And I would have to agree. I think that the response of if Article 5 was triggered would be proportional to the country that was impacted. So if Latvia was attacked, it's not going to be the same as if the UK was attacked, or France was attacked, or Germany was attacked. Unfortunately, that's just the reality, and this is why it was written in such a flexible fashion. It doesn't say that every country must immediately declare war against the aggressor, who's going to be Russia. It means that you have to, in some way, come to the aid. So will they muster the manpower that's needed if Poland was attacked? Or what sort of level of support are they actually going to be offering? And NATO is convenient because it had this peace dividend effect where it allowed Europe to distribute its military, and on paper it looks great when you say, okay, we got 3.5 million soldiers spread across 35 countries. Yeah, it looks really good on paper, but they all speak different languages. Yes, there's a degree of interoperability there, but no nation is going to want to give up its best troops and its best forces. So you're always, like you're having in Ukraine, this ragtag assortment of weaponry and military personnel and mercenaries coming together, who many of them are probably second rate, not to disparage them or anything, but that's just the facts. You know, you're always, when you're part of a coalition and it's not something which is really enshrined in any given country's constitution per se, and you're not a part of the same country, you're never going to give your best. So this is why Putin is not really afraid of Article 5, and he's calling the bluff. It's very convenient because it means that while Russia has to damn near bankrupt itself going into a war economy to combat these 35 countries that, proportionally speaking, might only have to contribute maybe 0.5% of their global of their GDP to the military, whereas Russia is looking at north of 30% in order to combat all of this stuff. So I don't think that the response is going to be as crazy as people think. Nonetheless, it is going to be a vertical escalation situation. And it's not even so much the response and what the response is going to be, I think, that the Russians fear. It's that immediately when you invoke Article 5, you're DEFCON 2. Okay, and this is when accidents can happen. A guy can misinterpret something he sees on the radar. There can be confusion. There can be just increased amounts of military activity. That's when you get a lot of US planes in the air, and it's just a vicious cycle, okay, that could potentially take shape if something like that is triggered. Now, let's talk about Nord Stream. The Swedish prosecutor's office is reportedly planning to announce the termination of its investigation into Nord Stream. They just can't figure out who did it. Guys, if they're willing to lie to us about that, what else do you think they're going to lie about in the future? That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, let's keep it 100. Let's keep it 100. We all heard the Biden quote. Okay, and I'm still at the time when it happened, I'm like, maybe it's mental gymnastics, but I'm willing to consider the less popular view at this point in time. But remember, American journalist Seymour Hersh, who up until this point was revered as one of America's prized journalists, had suggested that the U.S. Navy had divers that planted explosives during the NATO exercise Baltops 2022, and that they were possibly behind the attacks as well as potentially the MI6. So, you know, I mean, the fact that they're, you know, basically throwing the case out, that doesn't mean the Germans are. But again, just if they're willing to tell a fib like that, what else do you think they're going to lie about in the future when the time is right? They're going to do whatever it takes to get whatever they want, and we're going to be the last to know. Again, this is what the Russians are preparing for, okay? They got bunkers for their populations. They got people who understand survival skills. Sure, they might not have virtual reality headsets to walk into telephone poles with, and they might not have overpriced skip the dishes, but they're going to survive Mad Max if the shit hits the fan. Another data point to consider that's evidence that they are getting ready to go into Ukraine, and by them I mean NATO. Turkey's drone maker, Bakar, who makes the Bayraktar drones, I'm probably mispronouncing that have been blown out of the skies over Ukraine since day one. Regardless, they are building a plant in Ukraine. It's not just like they're actually breaking ground. Now, we got to ask ourselves, in what reality would it make sense at this point in time to build anything in Ukraine? Okay, like in what fantasy land? If you actually are of the belief that they're in a hot war, a full-blown war, which they're not, because I don't even think Russia has declared war, and Ukraine I don't think has declared war on Russia. I can't remember the dynamics of it. But they're, like, legally speaking, they're still in a state of conflict, but not in a state of full-blown war. So regardless, why on earth, how would you get the insurance in order to do this? Now, the only reason why I could see them doing this, and this is the Turks, so they're kind of like two-faced, speak with a forked tongue, you never know what you're getting. They're building a plant right around Kiev. Is this bait? Is this meant to be used as a situation where they're going to build this facility? It's obviously going to get blown up by the Russians. If it's out in the open, that is, for all we know, and it would make sense to put this underground. I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't have a plant like this underground. That would make the most sense. But this is also another form of mission creep for NATO as well. It's a way for NATO to put the critical infrastructure put the cart ahead of the horse, I guess, in this respect. It could be strategic for them to do so. So that's something to consider. They're already planning on hiring 500 people, and it's going to be completed in 12 months. So they say, despite the fighting, the head of the company said that these plans are in full swing and nothing can stop them. Why? Why? Why not just build it in Poland, make a tunnel that goes under the border, the massive border, and call it a day? I mean, why would they put that in Kiev of all places? Not even in Western Ukraine, in Kiev. Ukraine, most people might not realize, they long ago granted its Western partners, and this is why NATO, it kind of doesn't matter. It's really just a symbolic coalition. They granted them the right to bring in foreign military contingents. I mean, when you really think about what's going on, imagine in the United States, foreign mercenaries coming in, and even if they're on your side, think of how weird that would be. The Verkhovna Rada adopted a bill that allowed units of foreign troops to remain on its territory with the following goals and objectives: to maintain peace and security based on a decision of the UN and the EU. Now, as I said before, Putin is okay with Western lands of Ukraine, and this is his exact quote, okay? He's okay with NATO coming into the western part of Ukraine. What he's not okay with is them setting up shop and basically using it as an excuse to bring the war machine closer to the front. Western lands of Ukraine, he says, we know how Ukraine got them. Stalin gave it away after World War II. These are Putin's words, not mine or Tucker's, all right? He gave away part of the Polish lands, Lviv and so on, several large regions. 10 million people live there. In order to not offend the Poles, he compensated for the losses at the expense of Germany. He gave the lands to Germany, the Danzig corridor, Danzig itself. He took part from Romania, part from Hungary. He gave everything there to Ukraine. And the people who live there, many at least, he says, I know this for sure, he claims, 100% they want to return to their historical homeland. And those countries that lost these territories, I wonder if he feels this way about Kaliningrad. Probably not. And I don't even know what the cultural or political or ethnic makeup is of Kaliningrad, so let's not go there. History will put everything in its place, he says. We will not interfere, but we will not give up what we have. So, yeah. The thing is that I don't understand. And, you know, why didn't NATO come out with all this war preparation rhetoric earlier on? Why did they wait until now? Are they really that dumb to have not had the foresight to know that maybe this counteroffensive thing is not going to work? And, I mean, really, realistically, if it worked, do you think we would be able to get out of it without some sort of nuclear incident? And nothing short of a nuclear incident, I can tell you right now, is going to shake these markets. You know, I was talking to a friend today about what kind of crisis would we need? What sort of black swan event would we really need to crash the markets? Because what happened since COVID is, well, this graph kind of tells the tale. It's almost like the more crisis, the better the market reacts. Why? Because we've been trained to believe that when shit hits the fan, that the Fed is just going to turn on the money printers again, okay? And unfortunately, there's going to come a point where maybe that is not going to happen. And I think once we get to that point where we have a crisis and the Fed doesn't turn the money printers on and instead converts the money printer into bullet manufacturing facilities, I think that's when people are going to get a rude awakening. But at this point in time, the threshold for black swan event at this point has to be something of a nuclear magnitude in order to shake the markets, because anything less than that, people are just going to shake it off. And quite frankly, if there was a nuclear bomb that got dropped, you know, the delusion of the markets nowadays, people would find some way to twist that as a good thing. And as crazy as it sounds, right? I mean, you really have to ask yourself, why throughout the pandemic did the markets go up in the way they did? It was absolutely mania. It was insanity, okay? And if you look, the PE ratio, and I always bring up the PE ratio because it's very important in terms of just understanding in general how overvalued the market is. And people are talking right now about how the Chinese stock market is down like 30% on the year, one of the indices there anyways. And yes, while that might be true, look what happened in 2008. I hope you can see this. Let me just make sure you're getting focused here. I think you're getting focused there. Okay, so this is a comparison of the CAPE ratio, the cyclically adjusted PE ratio for I believe this is the Shanghai index versus this would be the Schiller PE ratio based on the S&P 500, I believe. And right now the Chinese, okay, so how this works is the lower the number, the more fairly valued the markets are. The higher the number, the more overvalued the markets are. At the dot-com bubble, that was our peak, okay? Right before the dot-com bubble, that's when the market was wildly overvalued. Everybody thought that the internet was going to change the world, as it did. Unfortunately, not for many more years than a lot of people anticipated, which probably will be like the whole AI thing if we make it that long. So anyways, the market bottoms out, or actually, sorry, this is 2008, okay? And so up until that point, the Chinese had their bubble. They had their crash. Okay, and that crash actually preceded and coincided somewhat with the crash of 2008, the housing crash in the United States. But you can see that these things diverged at some point. So what happened here? Because there was a little bit of overlap there. Yes, you know, China is a developing economy. There was a lot of hope about the Chinese economy. So it's going to be a bit more exaggerated. But then something happened right around here in 2011. And that's when quantitative easing really just became the norm. Okay, so we started printing money. China didn't. China actually had to, in spite of their real estate woes and all of that funny stuff that they're going through, China's PE ratio is trading at like 10 and ours is at 30. Ours is at higher than it was just before the Great Depression. That means that with everything that is going on, with the migration crisis, the civil unrest, the lack of production, industrial facilities. I mean, yes, the United States and Canada, we have a lot of resources. What we don't have is the industrial horsepower to turn it into stuff. That's going to take decades to create. So we don't have the capability. Our GDP, you know, we print money, we buy stuff. The Chinese, when the smoke clears, I mean, think about it this way. When the smoke clears, what do we have? We have whatever sort of shit, planned obsolescent shit that's going to break down in 2 years that we bought from China, okay, of our own choosing. It's not the Chinese fault that they're making cheap stuff. That's what we want. We want cheap stuff. We want things to be cheap at Walmart. So when the smoke clears, we're going to have this stuff. And once that stuff runs out, that's it. What do the Chinese have? Well, they have all the manufacturing facilities. They have the high IQs. I mean, I was reading a study today. I mean, the difference between the average IQ in the United States and just the educational achievement, the value system, social media. I mean, we are totally screwed. The only thing we have going for us is we have a very diverse landscape. We have a massive landscape. We're insulated by the oceans. You know, we're not buttressed by the Russians and on one side and the Indians, and we're not like, you know, condensed into an area with 5 billion people. We got that going for us, but we don't have the industrial horsepower. So while the Chinese have had their market crash and consolidate, that's what's happened. It's like a wildfire, okay? If you don't have natural wildfires, if you don't allow that to happen, or if you don't do prescribed burns, and if you can try to control everything, eventually you're going to get the mother of all wildfires that is going to come through there. It's going to smash records in every possible metric because you tried to control nature, okay? And this is what the Fed is trying to do. They're trying to control nature. They're trying to keep kicking the can down the road, which is why our crash is going to be far, far worse. It's going to be on a whole other scale. The Chinese, they're taking their licks right now. Okay, which is a smart thing to do. You get rid of all those zombie companies that aren't making money, that are just there because the retail investors have nothing better to do with their time. You get out all the dumb money out of the system. Okay, and you consolidate. Only the strongest, smartest businesses succeed. Only the strongest trees, the young ones, okay, the strong ones that aren't dead and overgrown and, just a dead standing timber. So it's a great metaphor to understand that. Anyways, that's what's going on in the markets. The Chinese are front running, and a friend of mine today told me, he said, you know what? The Chinese are very militarily smart, and it's not because they are good at, tactics in war. It's because they're front-running things. They know that the crash is coming. They know that the global crash is coming. In their mind, it's better to crash right now, because when we crash, where's all this money going to go in the future? It's going to want to go to whoever is most stable. And by that time, the Chinese will have established and built up on the basis of these consolidated markets. They got rid of all the chaff and all the insolvent companies, zombie companies, and money so China is crashing right now. In a year or so, when we crash, there's going to be a greater likelihood that people are going to say, China is in the same place we are, only they're a year ahead, okay? And they have all the industrial capacity. So anyways, that's what's going down on that front. Rishi Sunak today, he's insisted though, in spite of all this, that Britain could defend itself against a Russian attack. So look, if you live in the UK, if you live in any part of Europe, here in Canada and United States, it's debatable whether you need a bunker depending on where you live. Where we live, we in the very least need basements because we don't live too far from the actual nuclear missile silos. And the way the jet stream blows stuff, it's going to be ground burst. It's going to kick up tons of radiation in our direction. So you have to have a plan to stay underground for a few weeks at least. But in the Europe, you need a bunker, man. At this point in time, if you're a prepper, that's something on the list. That's a box to check. Or an Anderson shelter or something like that. Something makeshift. It doesn't have to be crazy. But I mean, just think about Switzerland. I mean, one of the richest countries in the world. Why is it that they have so many bunkers? I mean, why is it that the country that's neutral with all the gold has bunkers? I mean, think about it, guys, okay? I mean, the Russians are buying... They're already in Mad Max world. I read an article today that said that the Russians are buying Ukrainian drones and all this military technology. They're buying it with gold. So they're already transacting like it's the apocalypse in gold. So yeah, gold is going to have value all the way. Now, I have to reiterate this story in case anybody missed this yesterday, but this is quite concerning that the Brits are fast-tracking the procurement of 500 military trucks, and they need to get these within just 7 months. That tells me that these 500 trucks are definitely going to... Why else would you need it so quickly? Yes, you could say you're procuring it because you want it for the Ukrainians, but I think that they're getting these trucks because they're going to come in the West in some capacity. These are going to be used for logistics, ammunition, food, water, support material, and operational locations. So they're getting ready to move in under the guise of some coalitional force, okay? We'll just, it is what it is. How much time do we got left here? Oh, we're doing good. 50%. I came prepared today. I told you this was going to be a doozy. I'm going to get myself into trouble today. We're going into deep waters, boy. Ukraine's top general sparring. This is from a Russian media source. Don't shoot the messenger, okay? Ukraine's top general sparring neo-Nazis, or sparing, not quite sparring, the opposite, sparing neo-Nazis from frontline slaughter. Now, here's my take. I think it's within the Overton window for me to say this now, as crazy as that is in a Western democracy where you're supposed to be able to speak your mind. Apparently you don't, because if you do, you end up rotting away in a Ukrainian jail cell or being shunned by your peers for going and interviewing the guy who everybody says is evil, who, if that is the case, if Putin is as evil as they say, shouldn't it be obvious then? Like, shouldn't we want him to basically broadcast his evil to the world so we could refute it with logic and debunk it? That's why I think this Tucker thing is overblown. I don't think that, sorry to go on a wicked tangent here, but I don't think that we're going to hear anything from Putin that he hasn't already said in a lot of interviews. He's been interviewed by numerous Western talking heads before. He's given, hour-long speeches and presentations. It's going to be more of the same. The only difference is it's going to be being presented now to hundreds of millions of people who otherwise probably wouldn't have heard it if Tucker didn't interview him. Anyways, let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine. I've long since suspected, and the first time I came out with this idea, boy, did I get it in the comment section. But I think where we're at now, we've matured a little bit in our understanding of the situation. Look, there's an ultra-nationalist component in Ukraine. There's no doubt about that, okay? And you got to understand that this is just a continuation of World War II. And what was World War II? Well, there were three main superpowers. There was Russia, there was Germany, and there was the United States. The United States, arguably was in a similar situation because they were already enemies of the Russians before World War II, and they kind of became buddies at one point because maybe Germany got a little bit too top-heavy. But recall, there was trading with companies. There was, the whole IBM fiasco with the what is it called, the Hollerith something machines that they were utilizing in the camps. Anyways, there was Operation Paperclip after that, and I know that the Russians brought in a bunch of scientists as well, but did they make them integral to their Department of Space Exploration like they did with NASA and what was his name, Werner von Braun? Anyways, what we're seeing is a continuation of that. So we're utilizing that ultra-nationalist component as a battering ram to get into Russia because I think from the transatlantic point of view, the globalist point of view, if we can get two birds with one stone, if we can get rid of this element that really doesn't like Zelensky that much for reasons I should probably not have to state, but if we can get rid of those guys and defeat the Russians themselves, I mean, one of the best ways to maintain power is to get your opposition fighting with one another, okay? So if you can get the people you don't like fighting with the other people you don't like, then that's a win, right? So you pretend to be friends with one side when really you're just, putting them in the meat grinder. And I am in no way subscribing to the odious ideology of some of these individuals, these hardline ultranationalist types, Banderites, but Zelensky now could potentially have expired in his utility for these, for lack of better terms, transatlantic globalists. And what I mean by that is he is respected by that ultra-nationalist element. And now there's this talk about wanting Zelensky gone because maybe they've served their purpose and maybe there's a bit of pushback now. Maybe there's rumblings of a coup or something like that. Or maybe, just maybe, they've exhausted their utility towards this end and now they're getting ready to move to plan B. Okay, so that's what I think is going on. I think that they were utilizing one extremist group as a means to an end to defeat the Russians, essentially. Speaking of the Russians, again, what a surprise. Apparently Russian generals are still missing. I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in this, but apparently Valery Gerasimov has been missing for a few months. He hasn't been seen. Admiral Viktor Sokolov, believed to be killed in a missile strike in late September, has been the subject of uncertainty. And apparently the Russians have been reluctant to disclose the whereabouts of their top military commanders, thinking that this might be a strategic move. So they are actually worried about their commanders being targeted, which is why they're keeping a low profile. But I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in this yet because recall, we thought Zaluzhny was dead. We thought Shoigu was dead. The Ukrainians were saying at one point we thought that Budanov was dead or replaced by a puppet or a cardboard cutout at one point. So yeah, I mean, Anyways, as for this China situation, and the reason why with China is because, okay, so Americans and Canadians, we consume Chinese stuff. Now, when we stop consuming as much stuff because it gets more expensive because our dollar is being devalued, then where is that felt first? Well, it's going to be felt at the end of the supply chain, right? It's going to be felt at the level, like before it really affects us here because, yeah, we're going to notice things are getting a bit more expensive. But as things are getting more expensive, we stop buying less. And that means less stuff, less exports from China. That means Chinese industry begins to wane a little bit and begins to struggle. And then they start shutting places down. Then all of a sudden, that stuff gets even more expensive because they're not making as much of it. I had Peter Schiff on in his most recent time that he was on the channel. He explained this very thing, how reduced demand can actually increase inflation. And it's hard to wrap your head around because you think, well, no, demand is what fuels inflation. The more people who want stuff, the greater the price. And yes, while that's true in the short term, on the end of that, companies can start to build out more manufacturing, right, in order to meet the needs. But it's the opposite is true also in that if the demand is very low, then eventually you shut down the factories and it's harder to restart a factory. Anyways, what else do we got here? Okay, saving the best for last, I don't know. Iran threat Geiger counter. This is a real thing. I know it is reminiscent for anybody who's up to speed on this kind of stuff. It's reminiscent of the image of the bomb that Netanyahu brought to the United Nations 15 years ago or so that had like the different levels, and it was like this picture of a cartoon bomb and it had 80% and that's how close they were. Well, this was authored by David Albright, and it's actually, it wasn't directly pulled out of his ass. Like there is an extensive methodology there that he utilized, but it's something he puked up. We'll say it that way. I guess better out that end than the other end. So there is a method to the madness of trying to get this determination. Basically, we're at 151 out of 180 points. Now, interesting, he put it at 151 because that's in the critical red zone. If it was 149, then it wouldn't be quite as impactful, especially right now when that whole region is on the brink of triggering the Samson option for Israel, because what's likely going to happen is a war with Hezbollah in the coming weeks ahead. It's looking like that's baked into the cake because the Hezbollah and the Lebanese have rejected Israel's demilitarization demands that would have them basically moved to the other side of this river. So this is being promoted by what's called the Institute for Science and International Security. Anytime you hear the term institute, there's probably a good chance that some think tank money went in there, some very globalist high-level think tanks. And I'm not saying that all institutes are bad. Some, might have humanity's best interests at heart, but you got to be very careful with stuff like this because this is setting the groundwork, obviously, for a direct engagement between the Americans and Israel and Iran, which is why they're loading that place to the nines with weapons, be it Saudi Arabia, who in spite of their apparent interest in rebuilding Iranian negotiations, I'm very skeptical. I think that's very dubious at best. We're seeing massive amounts of weapons flood into that region, exactly what you would see in the run-up to a massive war. Now, they basically have the Institute giving them the green light, saying that, hey, we're as close as we're going to get to Iran getting a nuclear weapon. In fact, they're going to have 1 in a week, they're going to have 5 in a month, and they're going to have 12 in 6 months. And Iran is the only non-nuclear nation to have ballistic missile capability. Okay, their ballistic missiles can reach 2,000 kilometers away, and that's the ones that we know. They even have a weapon, the Kabir Shakan, which is a precision-guided ballistic missile that can actually be maneuvered during its re-entry phase. So most ballistic missiles, you give it the trajectory, it goes up, and then it comes down at its target. These ones can actually be maneuvered, and they're saying that this was one of the missiles they used. It was the longest range missile they ever fired. It was like 1,200 kilometers, and it was with pinpoint precision. They were able to take out this supposed spy in Syria with pinpoint precision. And it's not the first time the Iranians have done this. Recall, after Soleimani died, they took out a U.S. military base, And it was like you could not have been more dead center in terms of their targeting. And yes, they told Trump, they said, hey, you better vacate this base because we're going to do this. It was agreed upon beforehand. It was for optics. And, but man, like they have pinpoint precision that we should not underestimate. And if these things are maneuverable and are not able to be intercepted, then that's a problem, okay? So if they're able to evade air systems. Now, the reason why they're trying to build this connection between Iran and Hamas, recall, you know my theory about it's not my theory, but it's a theory out there that is claiming that the whole October 7th thing was all an intelligence gathering operation. And really, when you think about it, that makes the most sense. I mean, if they're trying to propose for all the Hamas guys to go in exile, I mean, what would the point of that whole thing have been if you're just going to end it all now and capitulate? Like, what would the point have been? You've destroyed the place, right? So there had to be a greater purpose there. If this wasn't a lie-hop situation, we're not going to go there. But the greater purpose in some intelligence circles' minds is that, in fact, the whole purpose of October 7th was to procure this high-level intelligence that provided them with very critical information on, you know, the locations of a lot of the strategic facilities, Mossad agents in various countries, the big enchilada, okay? And anyways, the IDF is firing back now, and they're saying that they found documents to prove a direct connection between Iran and Hamas. And this would make sense. This actually maps on to the theory that this was all part of an operation to capture some Israeli commanders, get some critical information about Unit 8200, the high-level Israeli cybersecurity team, and to be able to get that information that they could leverage in the war that they knew was inevitable. According to Daniel Hagari, the spokesman that for the Israeli military, he's saying that there were transfers totaling $150 million from the IRGC to Hamas, and that's pretty substantial, right? I mean, people might say, well, of course, but this is the first actual evidence that they might have. Evidence, so they say, right? Take it with a grain of salt. They also claim a tunnel was found containing a safe with more than 20 million shekels. Shekels, that's what it is. I heard Rafi Farber say it once. Shekels in cash. I'm not sure why they would have shekels, though. I don't get that. Maybe there's a lot of shekels exchanged in the Gaza Strip. Is that the currency they use there? Maybe you guys can let me know. And wallets with hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, maybe Prigozhin is alive in those tunnels somewhere. We just never know. Hezbollah has rejected Israel's offer to withdraw from the border, as I previously indicated. The United States set a record for buying Venezuelan oil last year, $2.5 billion, a record since 2018. What a surprise. And finally, North American Aerospace Defense Command detected and tracked 4 Russian military aircraft operating in Alaska Air Defense Zone. Don't worry, they're saying, don't worry, this is normal. This is very normal. And it is. It's actually routine. I mean, since I've been giving these daily updates, that's probably happened about 10 times. But of course, in the current tense geopolitical environment, everything is more meaningful when things like that happen, and you got to pay a little bit more attention. Now, I was going to talk about this. I don't think I should, but because I don't know how to approach it in a way that doesn't seem like whining, but there are people, and it's not just my channel, it's channels who are friends of this channel who are having their content completely ripped off and put on TikTok, given no credit for the information. And look, I'm fine with more people getting information. In fact, I've talked with some of these people who are doing it on TikTok. Basically what they do is they will take something I say, an original idea, because that's the great thing about being original and having your own ideas, is you're never going to run out of ideas anyway, so I'm not worried about that. These people are going to run out, you know, when we run out. But it's that they don't give you any credit. And so I've actually consulted with people and said, hey, if you want to repost my stuff, you can do that. Just put From the Canadian Prepper YouTube channel on it. If it's going to help more people out and if it's going to get more exposure for this channel, great, do it. The problem is that these guys will come on and they'll say the exact same thing I'm saying, like literally verbatim, okay? They rip off my videos, they rip off City Prepping. Everybody who's really putting in the work and doing all this stuff to come up with these novel solutions to these emergency preparedness predicaments that we talk about. And they get like, for some reason, they get like 10 million views, like just tons of views. And it seems like the better produced you make something on TikTok, the less the algorithm pumps it. I really do feel that that algorithm is not only trying to dumb people down, but it is a carbon copy of the whole Chinese model of being completely disrespectful towards copyright and just respecting the brand that people build up. And again, I'm fine with people knowing about it, but this is just a problem. So if you ever see that, I don't even know what you can do. Maybe just leave a comment to just say, hey, this is where you've seen that information, because it's going to become very, very common. Because unfortunately, I'm realizing that there's a lot of really unoriginal people out there who haven't meditated on this stuff for the longest time. Case in point, there's a video I did called 7 Things That Will Be Worth More Than Gold. And some guy, who I'm not going to name, went and did the same video on TikTok verbatim, okay? Just literally copied exactly what I said. It's just his face in front of a camera, did not give any sort of credit to the video I did. And however, he forgot about one thing, but and that's number 8, which I've decided to add to the list. And basically, seeds, okay? Seeds are going to be worth more than gold. Okay, I'm watching a movie. It's called Into the Night. It's actually a Netflix series. And the whole premise is that, the sun is killing people. There's something about the gamma radiation fries people like a microwave. And so they're on a plane and they got to stay in the darkness until they can get to this bunker. And then after they finally make it to this bunker, there's a war with the Russians that starts because everybody's trying to get the seed vault that's in Norway, because seeds were all destroyed by this gamma radiation, microwave radiation emitted by the sun. Anyways, it's a cool story. So seeds, very, very important, worth more than gold, okay? Honey is another thing. Honey lasts forever. It has a lot of multi-purpose functionality. You can use it as a topical medical agent. It has various antibiotic properties to it. And of course, it's delicious, lasts forever. You have cocoa, which is not available in the Northern Hemisphere. You have instant coffee, which will also last forever. You have sugar, you have salt, and then you also, lastly, have medication. Medication is going to be worth more than gold, okay? And there's few things that are going to be worth more than gold. All of the aforementioned are going to be those things. So stock up on those things while the getting is good, and please go and check out our tent video that we released today. With some of these big budget items that I review, you see, I've been doing this for 15 years. So, I mean, I just can't bring myself to going and doing a video that's going to cost me $5,000 to make for like a $200 tent. I mean, yes, that'll be fine. You could do it with a tarp, and there's definitely an interest in that sort of thing. And, maybe we could look into doing that at some point, survival skill stuff, but it's really not my forte on this channel. There's people who are really great at doing that kind of stuff. But the reason why I like doing those videos with the bigger ticket projects and just the more novel gear, it's not all expensive stuff. It's because if you actually watch those videos, we walk you through everything you would need in a campsite, in a grid down situation. I mean, we talk about all the gear. We touch on everything from the bedding, the sleeping bag, the heating system, the lighting system, the power generation, the whole 9 yards. So it's not just about the tent. Those videos are actually about the whole ecosystem that surrounds any sort of off-grid endeavor like that. Anyways, go check it out. And I thought I was going to make it to an hour, but maybe tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.